member is online, so she will be joining us online for the next several meetings. Hence why you're seeing me, because it's hard to run a meeting online when you're at home. So I have a tendency to mumble, especially without a mask, but even with a mask. So if you can't understand me or can't hear me, please let me know. So why don't we go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for being here. Let's start off with the first item we have, which is introduction of our student school board members. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brenner to make a few comments before they give their oath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to introduce Alicia Dela Cruz, a junior at Red River High School this evening, who's joining us as a new school board member, along with Evan Whalen, a junior who is from Grand Forks Central High School. And just a refresher for everybody around the table and those viewing, 3 years ago, we started including, we created a policy which would include student school board members sitting at the table. And these are juniors or seniors who are of good character and good standing with our school districts, and they abide by the North Dakota High School Activities Association. They are nominated by their school principal or principals and appointed by the superintendent and the board president of the Grand Forks Public School Board. They are seated at the table, and they are to serve as an advisor and the voice of students at all three of our campuses, including our middle schools as well. And they serve a one-year term, typically starting July 1, but we had a little bit of a unique start this year, and their term would end June 30th. Like in the past, we've had juniors join the board and actually serve 2 terms, so that will be up to the board and up to our board members if they would like to continue after that. Unlike all of you, and we didn't talk about this during your orientation, but you are not paid for this position. That'd be a violation of the High School Activities Association, so you wouldn't be able to participate in activities. So with that, I would ask Dr. Lunn, our board chair this evening, if he would assist both Evan and Alicia with their oaths of office.
I, Evan Whalen, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of North Dakota, that I will faithfully discharge the duties of student representatives to the School Board of Grand Forks Public School District Number 1, according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
I'll give you an air 5.
I, Alicia Dela Cruz, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of North Dakota, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the student representative to the School Board of Grand Forks Public School District Number 1, according to the best of my ability. So help me God.
Congratulations. Congratulations to both of you, and I can tell you the services of prior students have been invaluable to this board. Even though you're an unpaid member and you can't vote, your opinions mean a lot to us, so we appreciate your time and effort, so thank you. Why don't we move on to item 2, which is approval of the agenda. Dr. Brennan, do we have any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
Do I have a motion? Motion by Doug. Do I have a second? Second by Cynthia. Is there any comments or questions about the agenda? Seeing none, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. We have the approval of the minutes for September 14th. We have a motion by Bill, and we have a second by Doug. Any comments or questions about the September 14th minutes? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Now we have a time for citizen comments. I see one citizen in there in the audience. I'm not sure if she wants to comment. Pam doesn't want to comment, so we will move on to item 5, which is superintendent's recommendations for discussion. And I don't know if I didn't grab anybody to review the norms. Did Amber grab anybody? Okay, I'll just take it myself. So the school board norms are, number 1, be prepared. Number 2, be on time. Number 3, value and respect each other. Number 4, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation. Number 5, be professional at the board table and when visiting the general public. Number 6, speak up when the norms are not being followed. Number 7, advocate on behalf of students and keep the community in mind. And under governance, it's number 1, lead by policy. Number 2, serve as advocates for K-12 public education. Number 3, entrust day-to-day operations to the professionals. Let the administrators do their work. And number 4, assist community members and stakeholders in following the chain of command. I'm going to delegate to Mr. Douthit to tell us how we did on these norms at the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's move on to Superintendent's recommendations for discussion. Number 2, school reopening update. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On page 6 of your packet, there's a very light memo that just indicates we're going to provide an update for you tonight as it relates to how the school year is going, and I'll take a bulk of the information and provide that for you. The good news is we are starting week 5. We have concluded 4 weeks of school. So far, so good with where we're at and being able to stay open. As a reminder, we are one of the few large school districts, perhaps the only large school district, who is in a pre-K through grade 8 face-to-face model on a daily basis. 9 through 12 is hybrid every other day. And then, of course, we have our distance learning community, which totals about 1,300 students pre-K through grade 12. So I'd like to give you a little recap based on the voices of teachers. Last Tuesday, I had a meeting with the Teacher Advisory Council, For those of you who recall hiring me, you knew that I was going to put together a group of 24 to 26 teachers who had never worked with me in any capacity in the past, and I would meet with them 5 or 6 times a year, and they would provide the voice of teachers outside of GFEA relative to how things were going in the school district. In other words, they're my ear to the ground, as well as many other people. So we met last Tuesday. They build the agenda for those meetings, and they start building that agenda well ahead of time, so it gives me some anticipatory time to think about some of the items that they're going to be bringing to the meeting. And I'll say this much: they are a professional group, they're an honest group, and they provided the testimony that was definitely worth hearing. What you've heard from us here at the table in the past is all things are going well, considering the environment that we're in. All things still are going well, considering the environment we're in. But let me share with you some of the challenges that they brought forward, and I'm first going to speak from a high school perspective. Some of the challenges that our high school teachers are feeling, and these are teachers who are in the face-to-face hybrid model, they're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of planning for face-to-face instruction, along with the distance lesson plans they're creating for the time that students aren't with them. So they feel like they're on call 24/7 because they do have lots of emails coming in from students who are at home while teachers are in their face-to-face model. So in other words, teachers are face-to-face every day, students are every other day, but the teaching and learning never seems to stop, and the communication doesn't seem to stop. So really, our high school folks are trying to do everything. And so one of the opportunities we had at the tail end of last week, we had a professional development day. And based on what they shared with me, I staffed it with our cabinet level administrators. We tried to find some space on Friday during our professional development day for those teachers to have a conversation with principals and to sort of catch up because they just feel like they're drowning. So we did provide some time for them in the afternoon where they were able to work on lesson plans, work on what the next steps might be. And I think that was well received, at least a few communications that came directly to me from some teachers. They believe that time was well spent on Friday. Another one of the challenges that we're struggling with is filling substitute teacher vacancies, particularly at the middle and high school levels. Principals spend their first hour every morning, usually starting at about 6 a.m. Mr. Douthit remembers those days well, trying to piece together and patch together a plan to make sure that all courses are covered. On paper, it appears that we would have enough substitute teachers available. And this would be non-COVID related, by the way. These are just daily absences that are probably just aggravated because of the environment that we're in. So one of the opportunities that we're exploring and that we've already moved on at a couple of campuses, we're using some of the CARES Act carryover funds that Mr. Berge talked to the Finance Committee about, the $1.6 million that we're supposed to spend by December 31st. We're hoping that deadline is going to be waived. But nonetheless, we're going to employ a substitute teacher at each of our campuses, and perhaps even more at some of our larger campuses, so those people will report to work each day not knowing what their assignment's going to be, but at the very least, principals are going to know they have somebody who they can count on, rather than trying to go to every teacher saying who wants to give up a free period to cover a classroom. And at the middle school, the free period, because they're in the block schedule, is more like an 88-minute period, and that's a pretty good chunk of planning time that teachers would be giving up for the stipend that they'd receive to be a substitute. So that's one of the opportunities that we're looking at. Another challenge, and this is maybe a little more unique in this environment. As a former principal, I can say that supervision was always a challenge with the number of staff that we had on hand before school and after school. But because we've put students in smaller cohorts in communal spaces before that first bell rings, that creates some logistical supervisory things. Some teachers have stepped forward and have found some creative ways to provide some coverage, whether they're taking a group of kids out for a walk before the school day starts, so that frees up space for some other teachers to get to their planning time. We haven't reconciled that completely, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That is one of our challenges. Another challenge is keeping our distance learners connected and engaged at all levels, depending on what the construct in the home environment might look like. Some teachers are having a hard time tracking down students when they're supposed to be engaged, whether that's elementary, middle, or high school, probably seeing more of the aggravation at the middle and high school level. And that's not unfamiliar to the experience that we had last spring. So we're trying to do some creative things to wrap our arms around kids, make sure we contact them. We would follow our same attendance procedures that we would have in place relative to our Stay in School project, where we're using our social workers and our counselors to make sure they're reaching out to parents, to make sure we know, that first of all, students are safe, kids are safe, and secondly, and importantly as well, that they're involved in their learning process. So one of the great challenges within that construct is at the elementary level, we're using our elementary principals to link up with those students who are distance learners who would be assigned to their school, i.e. Angie Jonason, principal at Lake Agassiz. She has perhaps 100 plus kids that she's monitoring out there. At the elementary level, that works fairly well. I'm not going to say that it's easy, because it requires lots of extra time. At the secondary level, between middle and high school, we have a large cohort of well over 700 students out there. And it's a little more complicated for a high school or a middle school leadership team to keep track of those students. To date, Ms. Catherine Galach is basically the principal of that virtual academy, and in some cases, she's also the principal overseeing all 1,300 students, and that's not a sustainable model. We're certainly appreciative that Ms. Galach has taken on that responsibility, but we're looking at some alternative ways where we can free up Ms. Galach's time so she can handle the day-to-day responsibilities that she does have. Not that she's not. She's working some incredibly long days to make sure that she can respond to all of our distance education teachers. That'd be 14 in total. They are not content experts by any means. Our distance education teachers are more like coaches and mentors. And if students are struggling in a content area that the mentor or coach isn't familiar with, then they're going to be linking up those students with content experts. And those would be teachers within our district, from a math department, a social studies, English, et cetera. And we'll provide some hourly compensation for those teachers who are working after hours. And maybe just to kind of put a bow on how teachers are feeling, because I started out with high school, and then I started blending some other elementary and middle school concepts in there. I will say that all teachers are feeling overwhelmed at this time, whether they're general ed, special ed, making sure, from a special ed perspective, a 504 perspective, we're meeting those minutes and providing the support mechanisms that a student's IEP or 504 plan would have in place. Those are challenges, but we're working through those challenges. Our near future challenge will be this. When we surveyed parents and asked them to commit to either distance learning or face-to-face, we asked them to commit for a trimester at the elementary level or a semester at the middle and high school level. We'll be surveying them again in October to see how many of those folks are wanting to return at trimester or semester time, or how many people are in our face-to-face model who might want to go the other direction. If I had to guess, based on hunch, I think more will want to return than exit the brick and mortar. And if that's the case, we're going to have some physically distancing challenges at the campus level, so we're exploring all options at this point. And one of those options might be to look at alternative space outside of our school setting. Another option could be, if we can't physically distance, we create cohorts within the environments that we presently have. I think we'd want to do the best we can to follow CDC guidelines. So just so you know, we're working on that, and we have some time to plan for that right now, but if we have to start popping up some tents across the community, and I say that with tongue in cheek, and I know you can't see that right now with my mask on, but there are some spaces that Mr. Thompson was exploring last spring, or last February when we were trying to relocate west. And we believe that some of those people would have the same response to our request to use some space as well. So more on that as that survey comes out. That would be our high level and a little bit of detail overview of where we're at today with our smart restart.
Catherine, Jody, do you have any comments, or the boss took them all today? Okay. Any questions from board members? Maybe I'll start with Amber. Amber, do you have any questions for us on?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Alicia, Evan, welcome to our school board. And I guess Dr. Lund was right. I do have a question for each of you. As we've gone into this model, as students, whether you're in the building or you may be remote, what are you finding is the strongest piece of what's currently taking place in our schools? And what is the greatest struggle for students, if you would please? So what's the best thing that's taking place through this? And what is the biggest struggle? Thank you.
I would say the biggest struggle would definitely be for most kids would be prioritizing with like the online school and like knowing what they should be doing and stuff like that, especially when they don't have a teacher to talk to every day. And that's tough. And then the strength would be that I think kids are like really willing to do kind of whatever it takes to get back to face-to-face. Like at my school at least, it's like everyone's wearing a mask, there's no complaining and stuff like that. So kids have a pretty good attitude about going to school.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I agree with Evan. The strengths are definitely that the kids want to get back to school, so they're taking the guidelines into consideration. And a weakness is definitely on the off days. It's hard for some students to prioritize when they should start and like how many breaks they should take and things like that.
Thank you very much. And I know a member of the school board who struggles with those types of decisions sometimes as well, but I'm not going to name names. So thank you for your input. It's very important.
Other questions? Cynthia?
I wanted to follow up with a question to the students based on that. Could you just share with us if you two are online or going to school face-to-face? Before I ask my next question.
I'm in the face-to-face hybrid learning.
I'm also in the face-to-face hybrid learning.
So my question for that is, so that's every other day you're going, right? So yeah, I've heard the prioritization is tough. I've also heard that that students often even don't have enough guidance to know what to do. Do you have any suggestions for that? For teachers? Because teachers have said to me, I don't know how to some of my students to do the work on their day off?
I mean, for what I've had pretty good, like, my teachers, they send a lot of emails and a lot of stuff clarifying, and even just notifications in Classroom and Google Classroom that, like, don't have assignments attached, like, just how to do it. And there's a lot of videos on, like, tutorials on how to do the assignment and how they want you to do the assignment too. It's also easier, in my opinion, if, like, when teachers explain the assignment that you're going to have the next day at the last 3 minutes of class the day before, so kids kind of get an understanding what they should be doing and kind of how far they should get.
I agree with Evan again. Explaining the day before is really helpful. Some of my teachers give out like calendars for the week, and it tells the remote days what you should be doing, and a lot of them are available at your scheduled time during their free time when you would be in school. They're available to email, which is really helpful going through the schoolwork.
Catherine, do you have any comments about the discussion there?
No, there's a reason why we selected these two to be on our board. It's because they're outstanding young student citizens. So no, but I think really a lot of the aggravation at the start of the year was students just really not understanding the routine and thinking that it was a day off, and teachers not knowing quite the nuances that they need to provide for students to be successful. And I feel like a lot of those kinks have been worked out. That doesn't mean, however, that on that day off, 100% of students know 100% of the time, 100% of what they're supposed to do, or are doing it for one reason or another. And so I think that also aggravates the situation when they return and maybe don't have the work completed that was expected of them. I don't know if you've recognized that even within your cohorts, but yeah, so it's going to be an ongoing kind of push and pull, but I think people are continuing to refine the system.
Thank you. Any other board members with questions? Shannon, go ahead.
So it's interesting to hear the students' perspective. I talked to a couple of teacher friends and spouses of teachers, all at the high school level. Just finding out how are things going for them, and that was a big frustration, I'd say, or concern, was that some students didn't seem to have the guidance and direction on off days, even if they were kind of expectations were set as to what to do, that they just didn't have that motivation at home. And that was a big concern for the teachers. And just one of my musings is, having worked in higher education, when you get to the collegiate level, right, it's sink or swim. The college doesn't care if you figure out how to attend class and be successful and get a passing grade. You've paid your tuition, right? They certainly want to help you there, but that's the distinction between, I think, what we're attempting to do, which is, in a hybrid, it's sort of the reverse classroom, which is what happens at a collegiate level, right? You're studying on your off days, you're in class for lectures, and you're picking up on nuance for what'll be on the final exam. And it's the difference in the K-12, where teachers are really, vested with the sense of responsibility to help a student learn in any way that they can. And so that is, I think that is a hurdle that I hope you all are picking up on, that these teachers really feel a sense of responsibility for that, and they're struggling to figure out, how do we help students be successful. And some of the frustration I heard was more from spouses of teachers is, well, now in the evenings, she's recording lessons or he's recording lessons for students' off days. And I thought this wasn't going to happen. I didn't think they were going to have to do double duty, but it seems like they're having to do that. And so I just want to offer that as just observations that I'm getting feedback on. And then my other question, which I wasn't certain of, is how will that be handled with students? I mean, if they aren't, rising to the expectation at home on the off days, is it handled just as if, they were in school and not completing work or assignments, or is there a different strategy there to intervene because of kind of the unique circumstance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit of both and. I know that after school, after the students leave, there's a period of time in which students can come in for additional help on campus, even if it was their off day. And I know that at the building level, they are exploring additional times and support systems like that are physical, face-to-face times that students could take advantage of. The students that cause the most angst are the ones that won't take advantage of that, however, Shannon, and that is where it gets difficult, and that's where it's a little bit of the former part of what you described, whereas it'd just be like if they showed up in class and chose not to participate in class, and it's a tough balance. And I think what you said illustrates the commitment of our teachers. I mean, that is the beautiful thing about Grand Forks Public Schools teachers is they do care. They are invested in their students, and they'll do whatever it takes for them to be successful. But as Dr. Brenner said at the onset, we're pretty tired already from that model, and people are just continuing to forge ahead. I don't hear a lot of complaining about it. It's just kind of acknowledging the fact that we all need an extra cup of coffee a lot at times to get the work done. But there are still some things that we're trying to work out in additional supports. It's just a matter of the proverbial horse to water, if you will, component of that.
And just to follow up, I mean, my concern is the burnout rate, right? I mean, we all know that this profession is very selfless and doesn't really take self-care, as a priority. And, I like the hope that more families might return to brick and mortar. I worry about that added stress that brings for our teachers and our staff. And I also worry that, we're entering a winter season that most are projecting you're going to see an increase in cases. And just, it's almost like, hey, we've gotten through phase one, but these burnout types of issues are starting to percolate, and, it may just be the hardest part we're about to enter. And so I think we're going to have to be aware that is a real concern heading into the winter and the fall.
I know, Catherine, at the beginning of the school year, we talked about making sure teachers know about employee assistance programs and stuff. I wonder if it's a time to maybe just reintroduce that in email to them or something like that. What's available for them for those that are feeling under stress. So, go ahead, Jackie.
As a parent in the district, I think, I think about also how the parents are doing in terms of the stress load and, trying to fill in the gaps that be the motivators, be the instructors, set up a good space for their kids, sometimes in very small spaces for some of our families. And one of the things that I personally found most frustrating is my kid would get a lot of communication from the teachers, but I wouldn't necessarily have that communication. And sometimes I think parents need to be invited to have that communication. So I don't know if that's a survey, part of a survey or something, kind of addressing how parents would like to have some of that touch base, I guess. I feel like we need to diversify it beyond just, hey, your teacher's parents in power school, so if you ever wanted to, you could, which is great. But sometimes people need to, stop in open forum or, something to kind of help ease some of those anxieties that are happening, build that sense of community so people don't feel detached. I think that might be important. And I know I had another question. I cannot think of it. Oh, I got it. I know we have COVID dollars, and I don't know what we're all completely using it for, and I was not here at last meeting, but I wonder if it might not be worth being a little creative in terms of having somebody who's assigned to just doing outreach for students who are struggling. I think of high-need communities, reservation communities often have someone who's just assigned to kind of, be that reach out, be the bug in a kid's ear that's having a hard time being motivated, can report back to teachers and say, hey, I know Johnny's been gone for a while, but that's probably because his parents are getting divorced during COVID. We've been talking, we got a plan, those kinds of things. Because I know our social workers are a little overloaded and have maybe some higher level or some more critical need situations probably to address rather than just whether someone's getting their homework done or being a little bit more motivated. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Catherine, do you want to comment about what's being done right now? I mean, Dr. Brenner commented a little bit about the elementary principals are kind of reaching out. Can you tell us a little bit about what's being done now for those kids we think are at risk?
Yep, same thing at the secondary level. So I can't remember if I mentioned it at a previous meeting or not, but one of the fears that I had going into this is that we would forget about the kids that aren't in front of us ever, and that's not the case whatsoever. So what's happening is if there's a student that is kind of falling off the map for one reason or another, isn't attending, isn't performing, same thing as what's happening at the elementary level is happening at the middle and high school level, where the teachers are trying to work it out with the student. They reach out to the family, still no traction. They employ the building support teams. So they notify the counselor and the associate principal who's assigned to that alphabet, part of the alphabet, if that's a high school student, and otherwise the associate principal at the middle school level, and they then reach out to the family and try to re-engage and troubleshoot to see what's going on. Social workers may be involved, case managers may be involved, et cetera.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Shannon.
So I had a question come to me about notifications of cases within the school, and in particular our policy on, acknowledging a quote contagious disease within the district. So I forwarded it on, but I think, that is a question that's been circulating, and I don't know if we need to explain the policy itself and at least go, emphasize the new policies we're putting into place and kind of the commitment there in terms of the adoption of those policies as they are written, just to, I guess, explain that a little bit better as to, or more simply, as to why we're releasing this information, but we're not going further.
We can explain it, and frankly, my frustration has been people don't want to listen to the explanation. So I can repeat it over and over and over again, and if they're not happy with it, they're not happy with it. And they'll continue to ask the question or go to you or go to somebody else until they get the answer that they would like. So what Board Member Shannon is referring to is we have some people who are really interested in knowing what the student COVID numbers are, the actual positive cases, the number of close contacts. And as I've explained before, on July 2nd, we got a legal opinion from Laura Cobb and Dick Olson, our attorneys, that we'd be in violation of our significant contagious disease policy by releasing any general data for that matter. That opinion was supported by our North Dakota School Board Association attorney as well in August, and so we've stood by that. And we have situations that could create some easily identifiable situations. And I don't think this board nor would the superintendent or cabinet level administrators want to be in that position. If a classroom was closed at a small campus and that classroom has 12 students, that's pretty easily identifiable. You could narrow it down to who the 12 students are in that classroom. We are doing the best we can to protect the privacy relative to FERPA and HIPAA. And we'll continue to do that unless the North Dakota School Board Association pivots on that and says you can release that data along with our local attorneys as well. So I can't communicate it any other way. I can't slice it any other way to make people feel good about the process that we're using.
We can say, though, that if somebody had significant contact with a person with COVID, they would be notified by the North Dakota Department of Health or a representative of the school district, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And the other thing that I should have added was those who need to know do know because they're considered close contacts, and so they're communicated with. If people aren't receiving a communication, then they're not notified as a not close contact.
Other comments or questions from board members? Shannon, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to also, because the importance of that information, at least for me, and I hope this is a true statement, is that, individuals like yourself, Dr. Brenner, are receiving that information and are considering that information in the sense of kind of the canary in the coal mine, right? If numbers are increasing amongst our student populations, that is some information that, at least at the administrative level, you all are receiving and are considering that in your day-to-day decisions. I think that's important to clarify. It's not as if we're not getting it.
We are getting that on a weekly basis on Fridays, yes.
Cynthia?
Question that I've had, and I have communicated it to Dr. Brenner, and that is this question about when, if the community would go to green, when we would be back in school. And over the weekend, I thought about the response that I gave somebody after visiting with Dr. Brenner just over email. If the whole community is green, there's a potential that we could go back to regular school, right? But then I was thinking, it depends on when that occurs. Like if it's at the end of the semester or right before a break, and then we're going into winter. And so I don't think that's as easy of a question. I mean, it's not a good answer, you know? I don't know if, I think we should just hear kind of a little bit about that, because there's some questions out there percolating about that.
We are a long way from green. That's the easy answer. We are a long way from that color. And any kind of pivot that we would do, we would want to give families advance notice. You see some other school districts who have these rolling schedules where they're face-to-face hybrid every other day, and then they roll into a 2-week distance learning based on their numbers. And I think, you know, the lesson learned there is communicate in advance, you know, what the plan will be. But we're just, our plan right now is getting ready for students to come back in November and January, and I don't believe we'll be green at that time. You know, that needle is hovering right in the middle of orange. There were a couple of days last week that it was pointing a little more to the yellow, but just even to get to the yellow, it would just take significant amount of reduction to get to that point. And then that's a whole nother level to move through before we get to green. So, but I appreciate the question, and I think this year is going to look like this year all year.
Dr. Brenner,
Yes.
kind of as a blend to those two questions, I think one thing that didn't come up that I would just appreciate a comment on is I think some of the confusion with reporting student numbers comes from the fact that there's other school districts in the state who have been reporting, and some of those school districts are local K-12 schools right near us. So could you just comment on what your perception of that discrepancy might be related to maybe some schools are doing that and we're not? Is it the way that our specific disease policy is written? Is it in absence of that disease policy we've received from our local general counsel and the school board association council that we just shouldn't be doing that? I think that's an important piece to know, because I think some of the confusion then comes from when you see in the paper X school district has this many student cases, and then we're saying we're not reporting those numbers.
I can't speak on behalf of why or why not other school districts are providing that information, other than I'm pretty confident that each of the school districts who are communicating have a significant contagious disease policy, because it's required, particularly if they've adopted the North Dakota School Board Association. So, you know, either A, they have the policy and they're ignoring the policy and they're communicating from a high level and they don't feel like anything is identifiable. B, they don't have the policy, or C, they're ignoring their policy altogether. But I can't speak specifically to that. I know Fargo had not been releasing any information up until just late last week was the first time they released high-level student numbers. I think the difference, again, for us is we are in a day-to-day pre-K through grade 8, where most other school districts are in a hybrid model. So I think it's easier to trace and track down to the individual person should we release high-level numbers. Again, if something changes and North Dakota School Board Association would pivot on that and our local attorneys would pivot on that, I'm happy to follow their lead. But right now, we are following their lead. so I'd rather err on the side of caution, knowing that we've got substantive support from our attorneys to communicate the way we are communicating.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Jackie?
I think part of, because I've gotten the same questions that everyone else is probably getting, I think part of it is a lack of understanding of legal matters, of public health matters, those kinds of things. But I also think part of it is people are really concerned that maybe there's not a checks and balances or something along those lines. Like, well, if someone's, if we've got 5 kids that are sick in my small school, who's keeping track of that if it's so secret? People think that it's, building principals aren't going to know, and, teachers aren't going to know. And I'm actually very, I think, blessed at this time to be working both for public health and be a school board member and be a part of some of those conversations. And I can assure people who are listening that there is a great deal of work. There's a great deal of communication. There are people who need to know, who are knowing, who are keeping track of these things, who are very concerned about the health of our students, of our teachers, of our staff. And so those checks and balances are there. There's not going to be a situation where nobody knows how many kids are sick in order to just, people's health are going to be risked because people don't want to share that information. Certainly if it rose to that level, people would be aware. And I think that's important for people to know. Just because you're not seeing the workings doesn't mean that it's not happening. And there's just so much happening that to communicate all those pieces would be completely overwhelming for everyone, I think.
Just like to follow up on Jackie's comments. All of our principals are considered non-disclosure agreement personnel. They signed off on a document along with their administrative assistant who reports directly to them. So every campus knows and understands who should be in school and who should not be in school. And they have a direct link to public health, to one of the contact tracers. As a matter of fact, Alan Anderson is, I would call him the umbrella person of contact tracing. They're in frequent communication with him. We also have 2 people who are on call throughout the weekend. Gina Wheeler and Lindsay Rude rotate a phone. They take turns working overtime on the weekends to make sure when those calls come in that information gets to the building level principal as well. So to Jackie's point, it's fairly tight, it's fairly cohesive, and we've got some highly, highly competent people who are working through this process. So thank you for that reminder, Jackie.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Just one similarly related question, then one a little off topic. I think another important question that it can maybe help instill some confidence is our contact tracers that we have within the district. When there has been a reported case, have we been able to complete contact tracing and notification within the 72-hour period that we have for closure? I mean, I think bottom line, that's what we need to know, is that we're able to meet the timelines that we've set forth.
The answer on our end is yes. Sometimes public health might be a little behind, but so far I don't think anything has been aggravated to any large degree, looking at my colleagues.
And then the sort of off-topic question. Is there any thought to hosting, another Grand Forks Public Schools mass testing opportunity? I know, some businesses are considering doing that again as we head into fall and winter.
We just received notification that tomorrow, Tuesday and Saturday, at the High Performance Center, there'll be another mass testing. And then it looks like it's going to be every Tuesday thereafter and every other Saturday up until Thanksgiving. We can get that schedule created and attach it to Friday Focus.
Any other questions? Cynthia?
I'm going to ask the students one more question about fear level. So one of the things that I've heard is that some students are afraid. That I don't think that's the case at elementary schools, at least not from my little bit of observation at just Ben Franklin. Kids just seem totally comfortable. What do you think about in the high school, since you're in the high school? Do you think that there's fear levels are higher? I've been told it's very quiet in the halls. when you're, exchanging classes, things like that?
Yeah, it's definitely quieter than it has been in years before, but from like my understanding, like kids aren't exactly afraid. They're just gonna follow what they're told to do, and we're told to not, congregate in the hallways and get things moving and sit in your desk right away and stuff like that. So I think part of that may like seem like fear, but in reality, it's just them kind of doing what they're being asked to do.
Yeah, I haven't really heard anything about them being scared of getting it or anything. I think they're just trying to follow the guidelines just so that we can get everyone into school. I think that's what they really want, especially juniors and seniors. They want to be with their friends the last 2 years of high school. But yeah.
Just one comment about the transparency and the notification. Remember, we as a board approved a matrix that the administration is following for closing classrooms or schools, and I know they're following that matrix that we've approved, which is a public document. So, other questions or comments from any other board members? Thank you. Good discussion. Let's move on. Got to get my cheaters out. Let's move out to item 6, Superintendent's recommendations for action. 6A is the fiscal year 2020-21 district budget and tax levy certificate of levy. Mr. Berge.
Well, thank you. The budget information starts with the memorandum on page 7 of your board packet. And attached to it is the public school district budget and tax levy certificate of levy for fiscal year 2020 to 2021, which must be filed with the county auditor by October 10th. This information was all the information all attached. The spreadsheets and the certificate of levy document were discussed last Monday at the finance committee meeting. So I'll give a kind of a higher level review of the differences between the preliminary budget, which you as a board approved the preliminary budget 2 months ago today on July 28th. Certainly a lot has changed since then. We've actually begun the school year and are on week 5 here. And so we've made some adjustments to the budget based off of actual operations and some other changes. So at the high level, the mill levy, the amount of the mill levy at 101 mills is the exact same as what we had last year for 2019 to 2020. So that is the same. And again, going through kind of the high level differences between the preliminary budget and the final budget that is up for your recommendation. The preliminary budget had a deficit of $4.47 million. The updated budget deficit that's included on these updated documents has increased to $5.7 million. So that's just under a $1.25 million increase in deficit. So changes to the budget that have happened in the last 2 months relate to some increases in additional teachers that were required to operate our distance education model, and it was some additional teachers more than what we had initially anticipated, as we did not have final numbers for families and students that elected distance learning. And staffing for isolation rooms, that's something that we added after our preliminary budget discussions. So those are the two main expenditure increases that impacted the budget deficit. Some things that have offset that on the revenue side are additional CARES Act funding for salaries and contracted services through December 31st. That actually was just enacted, I guess would have been, we met as a finance committee meeting a week ago today, so it would have been the previous Thursday is when that came out. So there wasn't a lot of time necessarily to work through that. However, thankfully we did have that information prior to the finance committee meeting, and we have implemented estimates for CARES Act dollars that we hope to have reimbursed for salaries and contracted services incurred all the way back to anything from July 1 through December 31st of this year. The timing of that cutoff is somewhat difficult for budgeting purposes from the standpoint of course, our school year is really end of August through the end of May or into June next year, and that CARES Act funding at the federal level ends December 31st. So really the big unknown question is, will some of these dollars, unspent dollars, will it be allowable to extend into the next calendar year? Or will there be a CARES Act version in year 2021 at the federal level? That's really unknown, and to the extent that there would be some additional funding dollars from the federal or state government, there's not enough certainty there to build that into a budget at this point in time. But we do have the ESSER funds that those came out in the springtime. Those are built into the budget. The CARES Act dollars that we feel at this point we will be able to qualify for reimbursement are in the budget. The presentation here a few weeks ago from General Electric and the LM Wind Power, a $100,000 donation, that was unknown at the timing of the preliminary budget, and we're very thankful for their contribution. One other item, the City of Grand Forks will be funding up to $475,000 for additional COVID costs that our school district will, the extra costs that we are incurring, and again, very appreciative of the City of Grand Forks. So that's all, from a high-level revenue and expense perspective. It's some additional revenue dollars that were unknown a couple of months ago. Some additional staffing and some additional supply costs, things of that nature are included. Perhaps from my perspective anyway, the most significant change from the preliminary budget is based on our enrollment. So our reimbursement from the state of North Dakota, or I should say our payment on a per pupil basis from the state of North Dakota is $10,036 per pupil. And what we were using at the time of the preliminary budget was our demographer estimate, which showed a predicted growth of 70 students. As of the early numbers from the first week of school, we're actually down 58 students from last school year, the 2019 to 2020 school year. And so, certainly what I included in that preliminary budget was the demographer estimate, which has been, very, very accurate the last few years, and certainly not knocking the demographer at all with all that we have going on. A big impact to our student numbers is that I believe an additional 78 students are being homeschooled this year in the Grand Forks School District. So that's 78 students, which accounts for a big chunk of that discrepancy from the demographer estimate of some slight growth to a slight decline. But when all is said and done, the decline in students, and I should say from the homeschool perspective, that's not unique to Grand Forks. In conversations with some of the other districts around the state, has been an increase in homeschooling with this year due to some COVID concerns by some parents. So with that decline in student enrollment and offsetting that expected growth of 70 students over this fiscal year and next fiscal year, that's just under $1.3 million in decline in revenues from the state of North Dakota on that per pupil payment. So this fiscal year that we're in now is the first year that the state is paying 50% on-time enrollment. So we'll feel half of that adjustment this year and the other half next fiscal year. And so I guess really at that high level, I'm referring most to page 11 of your board packet. And I'll jump there quickly so I have it on my screen. Yeah, so on page 11, in the center is a yellow column, 2020 to 2021 final budget. And so I have highlighted in yellow that expenses in excess of revenues or a deficit of $5.718 million. And if that is how this fiscal year ends up, our general fund balance would be that other highlighted number, $4.97 million. So our fund balance would be, general fund balance would be approximately $5 million at the end of this fiscal year, which, in cases during our school year, some of the monthly expenditures can exceed $9 million. So you can see from that perspective, a $5 million fund balance is, it's getting to the point where, it certainly impacts, concerns around, cash flow and some other things that we have to work through. So we're planning on additional finance committee meetings upcoming, and this is not, certainly COVID has aggravated our budget fairly significantly here. But in past, over the last year when we've looked at some 5-year projections, this is some of the direction that we were heading. But, certainly COVID and all of the unknowns has certainly aggravated our budget here this fiscal year. And, and even into next fiscal year, depending on when there's a vaccine and a variety of other things, it's, the impact is going to be far-reaching for sure. With the $5.7 million deficit that is in this budget projection, roughly or exactly $3 million is tied to construction expenditures. 2 years ago, we incurred about $2.5 to $2.6 million in construction-related expenditures. The most recent fiscal year was closer to 3.6, or slightly exceeded $3.6 million. We're budgeting here for $3 million is what's in here now, and again, a big part of what's causing the construction expenditures to come out of our general fund budget is our from a revenue perspective, the Grand Forks Public Schools has a 10 mil building fund. The state allows up to a 20 mil building fund, and all of the other large school districts in the state have a 20 mil building fund. So if we were to have a 20 mil level building fund versus 10, that would be about another $2.7 to $2.8 million per year in revenue, which would nearly completely offset what we have built in as a line item for construction expenditures. So in working with the task force, I'm kind of jumping ahead of things here, but just an apples to apples comparison with Grand Forks having a building fund mill levy half of what the other large school districts has, that's a big aggravant to our budget, the last several years in particular, and continuing on here at this point. And also included in this budget is between $1.5 and $1.6 million in net anticipated COVID expenditures. That is, again, aggravating that deficit. A wild card would be if there would be some COVID funding, again, at the federal or state level that would be available into next calendar year, and that's the big unknown at this point. The pages 12 through, about 22 include spreadsheets that are laid out similarly to what you see on a monthly basis with our monthly financial statements. That's similar to what you saw when the preliminary budget was approved 2 months ago. Pages 23 through 31 is the document that would be or needs to be certified with the Grand Forks County. All in all, the numbers are the same. It's really how the numbers need to be shown from a state perspective that is the difference there. So I don't want to confuse anybody. Both reports do net out to the same number. I'll certainly entertain any questions you would have. I don't want to go through the 1 hour, 45-minute finance committee presentation again. And board members on that committee certainly feel free to speak up if there's anything I overlooked too. Thank you.
Questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Jackie.
Did you say we're only on week 5 of school? I know that has nothing to do with the numbers, but holy cow.
Yeah.
It is a number, so that's why Mr. Bergey's interested in it.
And I can count it on one hand, so I especially appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Just a comment. I know that the City Council made a decision to provide funding to the school district. I know there was some disagreement, and I think, I can't recall, I believe it was in the newspaper that the President of the Council, Dana Sandy, made the comment, it's very important that our schools stay open and that we do this. And what I like about that is that shows that this is a community of not just a school board, not just a city council, not just a county, but yet we are all in this together, and a collaboration and a sharing of that nature is to certainly be applauded and to be appreciated. So it's my hope that as we continue to go through this COVID, that we all do our part in serving not just our students and our families, yet the greater community of Grand Forks.
Other questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I have a question about the CARES Act. So could it be used, I don't want you to stress about trying to explain the whole CARES Act, but could it be used for any kind of like structural work that might be needed, like ventilation and things like that, flow of air system?
Great question, Cynthia. The CARES Act dollars that were approved at the North Dakota level about a week and a half ago or so can only be used for salaries and contracted services. So no cleaning supplies, no facility improvements, et cetera. You know, we're limited to again, salaries or any contracted services, and it's not salaries in general. It would be it's for salaries that are an increase from what we would have normally incurred and due to COVID reasoning. So, for example, hiring some additional teachers to help us with the distance learning needs, or our isolation room staffing, et cetera. That's above and beyond what we had anticipated, and that's allowable for reimbursement. But the work of Dr. Brenner and Mr. Thompson and Ms. Galach, all the significant hours that they put in to help us get us to week 5 in an in-class situation. Those salaries, we can't use any of that for reimbursement, as it's based on an increase and new. Really new hours and expenditures. So we're somewhat limited, and also the difficulty is that the CARES Act funding expires in its current form on December 31st, and that's, we're not quite even halfway through the school year at that point. So that also is a challenge, and so I certainly don't mean to sound not grateful for the funding. It's something that we had not anticipated. But myself and in conversations with other business managers around the state, that's the difficulty with that December 31st cutoff date, and that's why we're really hoping that somehow that would get amended to be allowable for next year, or there would be a new form of a CARES Act next calendar year that will help us out with the remainder of our school year.
Something that we could do to encourage them to extend it, or is there a certain group that should be approached for that?
At this point, there's been a lot of discussion, I know, amongst superintendents around the state with our state superintendent Baszler. I know there's been some conversation or some communication, emails, et cetera, to the governor's office. Today there was a North Dakota Legislative Committee meeting, a subset of the Education Committee related to school finances. That was a topic today on the difficulties of fully implementing what we need to do for that reimbursement. So there's a lot of activity going on. If if you want to reach out to some of our local legislators, I think that may be helpful. But the issue is widely known and has been communicated, and a lot of it, the issue really is the CARES Act is, at the federal level, they're on a calendar year, so that's where the difficulty lies, and that the majority of the school districts have a June 30 year end, but the CARES Act, due to the nature of the federal government, has a December deadline.
And it isn't just school districts that are looking at the federal level. There's a lot of other industries. I think there's some slight hope that maybe during the lame duck session that maybe they would do something at the federal level. I don't think anything will happen before November 3rd. There's only one agenda item federally before November 3rd, but maybe afterwards, a slight chance. Other questions or comments for Scott? Seeing on the recommendation from the Finance Committee and administrative recommendation is to approve the 2020-2021 Grand Forks School District budget with the property tax levy of 86 mills for general fund, 10 mills for building fund, 2 mills for special assessments, and 3 mills for special reserve fund. Do I have a motion? Motion by Doug, second by Bill. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to item B, the general fund financial statement. Mr. Thompson, I assume that's you? No? Okay. We'll give it to Mr. Berge then.
Is that a hint you're getting sick of listening to me? No, thank you.
Not at all.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. So what we're looking at is the financial statements for the first 2 months of the fiscal year 2020 to 2021 through August 31st. General fund revenues were $7,050,000. Total general fund expenditures in the same time frame were $5.9 million, resulting in an excess of revenues over expenses of $1.142 million. I'll go through some of the details again with. Don't have as much information provided here as it's the first 2 months of the fiscal year. School had not started at that point, and if you note on page 33 of the of your board packet, I've got highlighted in yellow that budgetary difference column. I've highlighted in that we did not have a budget approved at the time of these financial statements being prepared. So I'll just really go through this at a high level again. With 2 months of activity and we weren't back to school yet, things are relatively straightforward. The one item I will point out is the state sources of revenue, the second line item, $6.8 million this fiscal year, a little over $13 million last fiscal year. That difference, it relates to the timing of the payments from the state of North Dakota. 2 payments had been received by August 31st of last year, so so that is just a timing difference, and we are not behind in state revenue compared to last year. Under the expenses, salaries, slightly over a 3% increase. Fringe benefits, a big item there. Again, when we're only looking at 2 months, a small adjustment it can create a significant percent difference. The timing of a payments to workforce safety in the amount of roughly $40,000 is the biggest jump in fringe benefits, and it throws that off to show a fairly high increase. And again, things like that will even out as we move throughout the fiscal year. Under expenditures, it'd be in the following couple pages. Equipment and furniture is up $285,000 in the first 2 months. We spent $295,000 on Chromebooks at that point in time, and that will be later reimbursed through ESSER funds. So that furniture and fixture line item is then in actuality not an increase, as we're using those ESSER funds to, in most cases for technology, that we'd be purchasing anyway. And through those replacement cycles, then we're reducing the technology budget to utilize those reimbursed dollars for things such as cleaning supplies and extra labor costs that we're incurring due to our COVID environment. Beyond that, again, with 2 months, certain line items can look significantly out of place. I'll just point out one thing very briefly on page 36, which is the detailed expenditures under other expenditures. So for example, where really we're recouping our budget to a certain extent with the ESSER funds is again through technology reimbursement. So the Apple lease item in the middle of the page, last fiscal year was $210,000. This year is $0, and that relates to using ESSER funds to purchase the replacement cycle for some iPads and MacBooks that that we won't have an ongoing lease expense. So actually, throughout the next 2 fiscal years, to a certain extent, there's going to be some reductions in our technology budget. Again, to help us, fully utilize and fully utilize those ESSER funds that were being reimbursed for expenditures as the deployment of those dollars to help us out with our COVID expenditures is very beneficial. And some of the budget improvement we'll actually see over the next 2 fiscal years. So beyond that, the bottom line is, if with the timing difference of that revenue duplication, we'd be, again, relatively close to last fiscal year with slightly over $1 million revenues exceeding expenditures for the first 2 months.
Questions or comments for Mr. Berge? Go ahead, Cynthia.
It's kind of a strange question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it. I'm thinking about the students when they aren't in school in terms of lunch. So I don't know if our budgets or the expenditures for food is going to change much. I don't know if students, this is more of an Emily Carroll question. I don't know if students are actually picking up food when they're not in school that day that they would have been ordinarily, or, if you see anything in this short amount of time about food budget?
That's a good question. At this point in time, I haven't seen a lot of the details in the activity. I know, for example, at the high school level with students, attending on a hybrid every other day model, I guess perhaps that's a good question for our student board members. I think we're going to be down quite a bit on meals at that high school level for those reasons. At the elementary level, with the majority of students in an in-class situation on a daily basis, of course, we're incurring the same level of meals. Students do and families do have the opportunity to pick up meals for those students that are that chose the distance learning model. So to your point, we're certainly offering meals as we have in the past. I just haven't seen the details yet after the first 4 weeks.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none.
Motion to approve?
Moved by Cynthia. We have a second. Second by Doug. Any further questions or comments? The motion is to approve the Grand Forks General Fund financial statement from July 1 through August 31st, 2020. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to item 6C, which is a GFEA petition for consideration as a representative organization for negotiating unit. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you. Page 38 of your packet, hard copy or electronic. These are 3 quick ones for you, but we'll take them one at a time. The first one is to recognize GFEA as a negotiating unit. It's a 2-step process. First of all, the recognition this evening, and then we have a timeline to make sure we post this in the case that anybody would want to contest it, and then we would bring it back to you on October 14th for final approval. For tonight's purposes, our recommendation is to receive the petition from GFEA to be recognized as the representative organization of the appropriate negotiating unit and authorize posting of the notice as per Century Code.
Any comments or questions? Okay, do we have a motion? Motion by Mr. Douthit, second by Mr. Manley. Further questions? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's go on to the Principals Association. Dr. Brenner.
Same rules apply, so I won't repeat. Just that we would need a motion to receive this petition from the Grand Forks Principals Association to be recognized as the representative organization for appropriate negotiations.
Do we have a motion? Motion by Jackie. Do we have a second by Jeff? Any questions or comments? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. And last but not least, Grand Forks Directors Association. Dr. Brenner.
Okay, hit the repeat button. Administrative recommendation is to receive this petition from the Grand Forks Directors Association for petition to be recognized as the representative organization for the appropriate negotiating unit and authorize posting of the notice as per Century Code.
Do we have a motion? Moved by Bill. Do we have a second? Second by Jeff. Questions that anyone has? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion carries. Let's move on to other business. Dr. Brenner, do you have any announcements?
Yes, I have 4 quick announcements. The first is celebratory. Twining Middle School was named as a National Blue Ribbon School. I believe I communicated that last Friday on Friday Focus. What a feather in the hat of our colleagues at Twining Middle School under the leadership of Principal Sherry Bilden. We're just thrilled. This would probably be at the very least, the 5th Blue Ribbon recognition in our school district. I don't have all the numbers on the top of my head, but I know there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into this process. But it's not about the process of being recognized. It's about the process of increasing student achievement and student capacity. So for 3 consecutive years, they've shown tremendous student achievement growth, and therefore they are one of 2 schools in North Dakota being recognized. That's the first announcement. The second one, this Friday, October 2nd, is National Custodians Day, and I've drafted a letter sent out to custodians on behalf of both school boards and district administration, thanking our custodians not only for being recognized this Friday, but for the tremendous work they've done to get our buildings prepared for students and staff this year. So you'll get a copy of that letter in Friday Focus. The third one, there's been some questions about are we going to have flu shots for our distance learners? And we indicated before that would happen. We just didn't have things firmed up. And this Friday, October 2nd, between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m., WellCore Health will be offering flu vaccination clinics at Lincoln Park for our remote learners. So there'll be a 5-hour window for those students and families. And information is being sent to those families. And finally, Mr. Berge talked about the $100,000 check from the GE Foundation, and we did receive that in the mail this week. Lots of good news. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Catherine, Jody, do you have any announcements at all? Brady, do you have any from GFEA? Any other board members have any announcements? Doug?
I just want to highlight that was in Friday Focus is that there will be a work session on the 21st of October, in case anybody missed that. 5 o'clock.
Thank you for that reminder. Any other announcement by board members? Any board requests for future consideration? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Amber, good to have you with us, virtually at least. Have a good evening, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry.
Our 2 students are without a cell phone each, which is to be applauded. I do know you probably each have your own phone, correct? Okay, I want to confirm that before I went any further. I think it's to be, oh, okay, well, I can't see it, so it's not there. And my eyes don't work. I think it's a reminder that when we're here, we have technology, yet I think it's also mindful to assure that our that we are present and not doing other things as we're sitting in our board meeting. Just a thought that I had as I watched two young people set a heck of a standard for all of us this evening. Thank you for that.
As they showed up 20 minutes before the school board meeting too as well. So thank you all. Have a good evening.